Hey guys, Tyler here. Star Trek: The Next Generation, commonly abbreviated as TNG, is one of the most popular sci-fi shows of all time. Set roughly 100 years after the events of the original Star Trek, many elements of the show, including characters like Jean-Luc Picard, as well as the iconic Starship Enterprise D, have disseminated into popular culture, exposing non-fans to the franchise through memes, casual references, and more. But a common consensus among Trekkies is that TNG took until its third season to find its footing. When introducing friends to TNG, many often say, just skip the first 2 seasons. But what exactly would you be missing by skipping out on the show's first 48 episodes? In this 2-part video, I'll give you the rundown on the major events and themes of TNG's first 2 seasons, starting of course with Season 1. Let's get started. First, some background. Oh, and by the way, there will obviously be some spoilers, so be warned. By the time the 4th Star Trek film, The Voyage Home, was released in 1986, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy's salary demands led Paramount to begin planning a new Star Trek show with unknown actors to increase the franchise's appeal in the cable TV and home video markets. TNG was initially pitched to the Fox network, but they couldn't guarantee a season order larger than 13 episodes, which was not enough to offset the show's enormous startup costs. The decision was then made to sell the series to first-run syndication, meaning that individual TV stations across the country would broadcast episodes without going through a network middleman. Franchise creator Gene Roddenberry was brought on to executive produce, and he hired a number of Star Trek: The Original Series veterans like D.C. Fontana, David Gerrold, Robert Justman, and Edward K. Milkis to form the core creative team. Rick Berman was also assigned as a supervising producer. The show was originally to be set in the 25th century aboard the Enterprise G, but this was later changed to the 24th century setting we're more familiar with. Concept artist Andrew Probert, who worked in the art department on the motion picture, was brought on in a leading design role. His designs came to define much of the TNG era, including the Galaxy class itself. Everything seemed like it was falling into place, and by 1986, D.C. Fontana was commissioned to write the show's pilot, Encounter at Farpoint. Now, when I say it's a pilot, that's not technically true. You see, a pilot is generally a standalone episode produced in the interest of getting a network to greenlight a show. But TNG's whole first season had already been ordered, so Encounter at Farpoint is simply the first episode. But frankly, this is semantics, and it really is just easier to call it a pilot, so that's what I'm gonna do. Okay? Okay, at first, Roddenberry insisted on a 1-hour pilot, but Paramount was keen on a 2-hour pilot as they wanted something spectacular to launch the series. Roddenberry volunteered to extend Fontana's script to 2 hours, whereas previously the script only concerned the so-called mystery of Farpoint Station, a starbase built by a seemingly unadvanced civilization called the Bandi. Roddenberry's extended draft introduced the character of Q. Now it's at this point that I want to shift gears a little bit. For the remainder of this video, I'm going to take you on a journey through time and space. The final frontier. Okay, seriously, let's go through Season 1 episode by episode, and I'll give you the rundown on each entry's contributions to the broader lore of the franchise. Crucially, I'll also highlight what makes each episode stand apart from the, let's call it, vibe of the remaining seasons and the remaining series. TNG's first episode, Encounter at Farpoint, is often listed as 2 episodes due to its length, but make no mistake, this is a single, unified episode. It's a grand episode in scale and scope, because it's our first glimpse of Roddenberry and Company's vision of the 24th century. Within minutes of Captain Picard boarding the Starship Enterprise, we're immediately introduced to Q and the threat that he poses to the crew's safety. or should I say, the threat he poses to their false sense of security. Because as I discussed in my video about the Lost Era, by the mid-24th century, Starfleet and the Federation as a whole has become, in many ways, complacent. Much like the United States at the end of the Cold War, the Federation at this point is pretty much the dominant power in the Alpha Quadrant, or at least in local space. Despite various border skirmishes with smaller powers like the Cardassians, there's a sort of Pax Romana throughout the Federation. Starting with Encounter at Farpoint, Q represents an obstacle to that peace. He's a harbinger of the dangers that deep space still poses to humanity. He says, "Go back." Humanity is too immature in Q's eyes to have gotten this far this fast. We get some lore about World War III, first referenced in the seminal original series episode Space Seed, as Q dons the uniform of a 21st century soldier to taunt Picard and the bridge crew. Picard accuses Q of being self-righteous and smug for prosecuting and judging humanity by our past actions. Q notes that prosecute and judge is an interesting concept before vanishing into thin air, but not without saying he'll be back. The Enterprise warps away from the area, but Picard orders all hands to prepare for a saucer separation. He orders Lieutenant Worf to command the saucer section en route to Farpoint Station as Picard and 4 subordinates head back to face Q. Picard is joined by Counselor Deanna Troi, an empathic human betazoid hybrid, Android Operations Officer Lieutenant Commander Data, Chief of Security Tasha Yar, and oh it's Miles O'Brien on the battle bridge, before Q transports Picard, Troi, Data, and Yar to a late 21st century courtroom. Q is quite literally putting humanity on trial, our foremost crime being that we are a savage child race. And this courtroom is real, not an illusion. This motif of thought and matter converging pops up again later in the season. As Q continues to belittle humanity, Picard and Tasha Yar in particular give passionate defenses of Starfleet and humanity. But the question this scene makes the audience ask is, ultimately, does Q have a point? Picard relents to Q's insistence that humanity has been savage, in the past at least, but asks whether there is another test Q can administer to determine if this still holds true. 31 minutes into the episode, it completely switches gears and the Farpoint storyline actually begins in earnest. We meet Commander William T. Riker and Lieutenant Geordi LaForge, as well as Dr. Beverly Crusher and her son Wesley. Already, Wesley comes off as a pain in the ass.
She's just shy around men she doesn't know.
Wesley?
A reputation that will follow him for years to come as he continually finds himself in situations that, frankly, no kid should be in. We get some foreshadowing to indicate that there's more to Farpoint Station than meets the eye. Picard and company finally arrive at the Bandy homeworld of Deneb 4, commonly cited to be the 4th planet orbiting the real-world star Alpha Cygni 2,600 light-years away. Not only do we learn that Picard and the Crusher family have a history, that Wesley's father Jack was killed in action under Picard's command of the USS Stargazer, but Riker and Troi have a romantic history as well. The command staff is finally united aboard the starship, where they discuss the intel they have gathered not only on the Bandy situation, but on Q as well. We get a few inserted scenes here and there showing off Geordi's visor, Data giving Admiral Leonard McCoy a tour of the ship, and other little character moments. This episode also introduces us to the holodeck, a revolutionary new technology that combines virtual reality projection with transporter and replicator technology to create a truly walkable 3D environment. When the plot actually decides to pick back up again, Picard reveals that he wants to illegally detain Bandy civic leader Groppler Zorn to get answers. But Q points out Picard's hypocrisy. This is not how members of a civilized society behave. tisk tisk. In any event, an away team explores subsurface tunnels below the station to find more Blue's Clues. Suddenly, a strange starship appears in the skies of Deneb 4 and starts firing, except not on the station, but the Bandy Civilian Center. Zorn insists that he does not know why this ship is attacking, but the crew doesn't believe him. The Enterprise prepares to fire on the ship, but Q calls out this hypocrisy as well. What happened to peaceful dialogue and negotiation, huh? Eventually, they figure out that the Bandy have captured an injured alien life form, feeding it just enough energy to keep it alive so it can morph into any shape the Bandy want. The ship in orbit is not actually a ship, but the alien's mate. The Enterprise helps free the trapped alien from its bonds, and the two life forms, colloquially referred to as star jellies, hold hands before flying away. How sweet. Q, dismayed that the humans have actually triumphed rather than letting the situation spiral out of control, takes leave, though he says that this is still not the last that humanity will see of him or his kind. So, as you can probably tell, I've been kind of passively aggressively critical of this episode, and that's because it's kind of a weak pilot. There's definitely some interesting ideas in Encounter at Farpoint, but overall it just has a really slow pace. It's almost like, oh, I don't know, this story should have been 2 separate episodes in the first place. While Q would go on to become a fan favorite, the introduction of this godlike being, alongside other arguably more grounded sci-fi elements in TNG, was, to say the least, controversial. Notwithstanding the, variety of godlike and non-corporeal aliens in the original series, but still, it was controversial. And while the star jellies are certainly unique in their design, in my opinion, everything about the Bandy just comes off as being incredibly boring, to be honest. All in all, Encounter at Farpoint is a pretty accurate taste of much of what's to come in TNG Season 1. This isn't your grandfather's Star Trek. This is Star Trek, but in the 80s. And as a result, much of what we get in early TNG is trippy as hell, both in a good way and in a bad way. Oh, crap. This video is getting pretty long already. Okay, I wanted to give a more detailed view of Encounter at Farpoint because it is the pilot, it sets the tone. But for the remainder of Season 1, I'm just gonna go over the synopsis of each episode and let you in on the little lore bits. But keep in mind, all of this has a point. Each of these lore tidbits informs something larger about not only TNG's contributions to the broader Star Trek canon, but the context in which each episode was made. Episode 3, The Naked Now, is effectively a remake of the TOS episode The Naked Time, in which the Enterprise is infected with an infectious infection that radically lowers the crew's inhibitions. Except this episode is sexier.
I am programmed in multiple techniques. A broad variety of pleasuring.
Yet still as, if not more, campy and cringe.
I'm a woman. I haven't had the comfort of a husband. A man.
Super cringe. Episode 4, Code of Honor, is often referred to as the racist one. Yeah, in this, Tasha Yar is kidnapped by members of an alien race who are all portrayed by black actors in what can only be described as stereotypical, tribal African costumes and roles. Even if that all sounds circumstantial to you, just note that almost everyone involved with the production who has since spoken about it has practically disowned it. Jonathan Frakes called it a racist piece of shit. Sir Patrick Stewart called it embarrassing. And Brent Spiner and Michael Dorn cited it as the worst episode that they ever filmed. Just skip it, for the love of God. Episode 5, The Last Outpost, introduces the Ferengi, who are supposed to be TNG's big bad, much like the Klingons were in TOS. Except, that didn't really pan out. The Ferengi were envisioned by Roddenberry as an allegory for Wall Street venture capitalists, and their economic system is definitely derided in dialogue, an early instance of open anti-capitalism in TNG.
I believe the analogy refers to the worst quality of capitalists. The Ferengi are believed to conduct their affairs of commerce on the ancient principle caveat emptor, let the buyer beware.
The problem is that the Ferengi in this episode come off as pretty damn goofy, and to many, they embody unfortunate anti-Semitic stereotypes. Episode 6, Where No One Has Gone Before, is actually one of my favorite episodes of the season. It offers instrumental character development for Wesley, who, all joking aside, actually I think gets a lot more than he deserves. In this episode, a mysterious alien called a Traveler alters the Enterprise's warp engines to take it to the Triangulum Galaxy, and eventually to the end of the universe, where thought and matter collide. See, I told you that motif would show back up. And the crew has to figure out how to get back home as the Traveler's health declines. Long story short, Wesley is again instrumental in helping the crew get home. The science of this episode is questionable, to say the least, but it does capture and focus the surreal vibe of TNG Season 1 in a more entertaining and thought-provoking way than a lot of other episodes. Also, you may have noticed up to this point that LaForge has been serving as a helmsman rather than chief engineer. That's because he didn't become chief engineer until Season 2, and in the meantime, no single chief engineer is actually introduced. It's kind of like a revolving door. In Episode 7, Lonely Among Us, the Enterprise transports delegates from the warring worlds of Antica and Soleil to a peace conference. But these aliens just can't stop trying to kill each other.
What the hell? Sorry, wrong species.
And to boot, an alien virus takes over the Enterprise's computers and the minds of the crew. Interestingly, this episode also serves as the beginning of Data's fascination with Sherlock Holmes. Riker also says,
We no longer enslave animals for food purposes.
Though this isn't really a statement about humanity being vegan in the future, it's really more so, I would say, about replicator technology having kind of made factory farming obsolete. But speaking of consuming animals, at the end, we learn that the Anticans are preparing a meal. They're preparing to eat a large reptile, and one of the Soleil delegates is missing. Yeah. Unsurprisingly, Paramount got quite a few angry letters from fans complaining about this implied cannibalism. In Episode 8, Justice, Wesley is sentenced to death for falling into a flower bed on a planet ruled by a religious cult.
Oh no! Oh, please no!
These people are, let's say, very sex positive, but also incredibly authoritarian. The death penalty is the punishment for all crimes, no matter how insignificant. Long story short, the crew bandies about the Prime Directive for 45 minutes before screwing off, preventing Wesley from being executed for touching grass. Episode 9, The Battle, is another one about the crew getting infected by an alien something or other, except this time it's just Picard. But in this episode we learn some more about the Ferengi, the Stargazer, and the fact that by the 24th century, the common cold and headaches have both been cured. That sounds nice. In Episode 10, Hide and Q, Q returns to test the Enterprise in another one of his games, and he ups the ante by giving Riker his powers. All things considered, this episode is not really that bad at demonstrating how Trek expertly navigates ethical dilemmas, especially since Riker must restrain himself and let an innocent child die. John Delancey is a delight as always, and this episode further develops the story thread regarding humanity's possible ascension into Q-like beings far in the future. Episode 11, Haven, introduces Counselor Troy's mother, Loaxana, played by Gene Roddenberry's wife, Majel Barrett. Troy is to be wed to a man named Wyatt, in an arranged marriage. The wedding falls through, of course, but we do get one interesting tidbit. It confirms, at least according to the Betazoid understanding of the universe, that all consciousness is connected and is fundamentally part of the same thing. They were really hammering home on this thought and matter, you know, converging kind of thing in season 1.
Thank you for the drinks.
Episode 12, The Big Goodbye, is a holodeck... Episode 12, The Big Goodbye, is a holodeck adventure.
He's not from around here, is he?
No, he's not. He's from South America.
Yeah.
That becomes even more thrilling when Picard, Data, Crusher, and totally not a red shirt get trapped inside with the safety protocols off. One of my biggest takeaways is, whew, man, the sexual tension between Jean-Luc and Beverly can be cut with a knife. Okay, let's kind of calm down for a minute. Yes, they do remain friends throughout the run of TNG, but you have to wonder if this is all building up to something. Maybe in Picard Season 3? The episode is also the first mention of the London Kings baseball team, referenced in DS9 by Benjamin Sisko. Episode 13, Data Lore, introduces us to Data's brother, Lore, who is reactivated when the Enterprise visits the planet where Lore and Data were built. Lore has a much stronger grasp on human emotions than Data and uses this to manipulate people, until he is, of course, spaced towards the end.
Throw it out the airlock.
Interestingly, this is an early instance of an internal continuity issue, as it's stated that Data does not use contractions. But not only does he use contractions in previous episodes, he uses one at the end of this one as well. I don't know, man. I consider that stuff to just, I would just chalk it up to like production errors. They happen. These things are made by humans.
Shut up, Wesley!
In episode 14, Angel 1, the Enterprise visits another planet with a heavy matriarchal society as the crew battles yet another space virus. And those seem to be happening quite a lot. Anyway, Riker leads an away team to inquire about possible survivors of a freighter crash. It turns out there are indeed survivors, but they refuse to leave because they're attracted to the women on this planet, and they are charged with fomenting dissent against the government. Riker gets the spotlight this time and delivers a passionate speech about equality. My main takeaway, this episode is very 80s. Oh wait, am I supposed to be rating these episodes like out of 10? I can't. I actually kind of agree with the IMDb user ratings for each of these episodes. This one's pretty forgettable. Episode 15, 11001001, introduces us to the Binars, a species composed of symmetric pairs of cybernetically enhanced humanoids. The Binars, initially brought on to upgrade the Enterprise's computer systems, hijack the Enterprise to back up the data on the Binars' central computer as their homeworld is threatened by a supernova. The episode is an early exploration of holodeck relationships and just how real these programmed synthetic minds can be. And it's also an early showcase of Data's painting hobby.
Oh my god.
Episode 16, Too Short a Season, should perhaps instead be called Too Long an Episode. Okay, seriously, the plot is this guy who's like a Federation diplomat takes an anti-aging drug and the side effects cause his organs to fail. I mean, that is really it. That is the whole episode. Benjamin Button looking at. In episode 17, When the Bow Breaks, Wesley and the other children on the ship, oh yeah, by the way, if I haven't mentioned it already, there are families aboard the Enterprise in deep space. Pax Romana, guys. The children are kidnapped by a race that has become infertile, but they're released after the Enterprise fixes their planet's ozone layer. That's also it.
I hate that teacher and I hate calculus.
Everyone needs an understanding of basic calculus, whether they like it or not.
Why?
In episode 18, Home Soil, the Enterprise discovers a silicon-based life form on a planet that's being terraformed, and these life forms call their carbon-based observers ugly bags of mostly water. In episode 19, Coming of Age, Wesley takes an entrance exam to Starfleet Academy. His fellow peers are a competitive human girl named Oriana. Wait, no. Oleana, a typically stoic Vulcan girl named Tishanik, and the Vape God. A Benzite named Mordok. This episode has one of the most obvious twists ever towards the end, but it's still enjoyable. This is actually like a really strong entry in the season, I think.
I am Rondon, you despicable melanoid slime worm! Liar!
Swear man, Wesley just, he's become such a meme, but his character arc is so much more nuanced. In episode 20, Heart of Glory, the Enterprise rescues 3 Klingon survivors of an attacked, stolen freighter in the Romulan neutral zone. Worf's loyalties to Starfleet are tested when the Klingons try to goad him into turning against the Federation. In TNG, the Federation and the Klingons are at peace, but these Klingons are fugitives who miss the good old days. The good old days of brown face. One other thing that stands out about this episode is that we get more lore about Geordi's visor. And there's even what sounds like a rearrangement of TOS film music. One of the Klingons also makes an offhand reference to the Klingon homeworld, which is called Kronos, but he calls it Kling. They were still working some things out at this point. In episode 21, The Arsenal of Freedom, LaForge commands the Enterprise as Picard and an away team are trapped on a planet defended by an automated weapons system. This outing offers an early example of Riker's commitment issues when it comes to, not accepting his own Starfleet ship command. He's content to just stay first officer. We also get some more lore about Beverly's grandmother. Where else has Beverly's grandmother been featured?
No! You're not Nana. Nana's dead. Leave her alone!
Episode 22, Symbiosis, is all about drugs, drugs, drugs. The Enterprise rescues a freighter crew and their precious cargo, which is full of drugs. It's the 80s, man. Just say no. The freighter crew is actually composed of members of 2 societies. The Breckians, who keep the Ornarans hooked on drugs. The Breckians deny the Ornarans their cargo as they argue their payment was lost with the freighter. And Picard, in a grand demonstration of the Prime Directive's cultural relativism, refuses to give the Ornarans medical assistance for their impending withdrawal. Okay, I make fun of this, but we'll see that Picard, he kind of knows what he's doing a little bit. He only goes so far as to break them off from the Breckians' control, because at this point the Breckians are pretty much bragging about how they have kept the Ornarans dependent. This is not violating the Prime Directive, Picard concludes. Funny enough, we do get a follow-up to this episode with the Season 3 episode of Lower Decks, Trusted Sources, where we learn that the Ornarans have a new addiction: physical fitness. How wholesome. But honestly, one of the most memorable and memeable interactions from this episode is between Wesley, Data, and Tasha Yar.
Voluntary addiction to drugs is a recurrent theme in many cultures.
Wesley, no one wants to become dependent.
So why do people start?
Drugs can make you feel good.
But it's artificial.
It doesn't feel artificial until the drug wears off. Before you know it, you're taking the drug not to feel good, but to keep from feeling bad. All you care about is getting your next dosage. Nothing else matters.
I guess I just don't understand.
Wesley, I hope you never do.
Episode 23, Skin of Evil, is notorious for killing off Tasha Yar, who you might have noticed I haven't been talking about much in this video. That's because her character was sorely underdeveloped, which I honestly think is a huge shame, because I think she showed so much potential from the start, being from an abandoned Earth colony outside the Federation's jurisdiction where their utopian socialism didn't reach, and so the colony was plagued with poverty, crime, violence, and of course, drugs. Denise Crosby has also stated that another reason she left the show is because Rick Berman is a sexist asshole. But Tasha's lack lack of character development is commonly cited as the primary reason for her departure. In the episode, Tasha is unceremoniously killed by a sludge monster named Armus, who threatens to do the same to other crew members, although they are eventually rescued. It can be argued, I guess, that this kind of random, unceremonious death for a character, and this is the first permanent death of a character, a main character on Star Trek, that it's more realistic, but you know, it just doesn't feel right, because, man, I mean, she had so much potential, man. Justice for Tasha Yar. Episode 24, We'll Always Have Paris, introduces a phenomenon called the Mannheim effect, an experiment gone wrong that sends a ripple across a multi-thousand light-year radius of space that causes brief time loops. It's like Star Trek's version of the snap, except with deja vu rather than genocide. This sci-fi concept in and of itself is pretty interesting, I'd say, but it's buried deeply under a far less interesting plotline of Picard reuniting with an old flame. All in all, pretty forgettable. Episode 25, Conspiracy, is a huge step up from the previous entry. In fact, it's often regarded as the best episode of the season. In the episode, the crew unravels a conspiracy within the ranks of Starfleet Command, and they discover numerous high-ranking officers have been infected by neural parasites. Side note, Conspiracy is the first episode to feature a Bolian, and it's also the first episode of TNG where the crew returns to Earth. Picard and Riker eventually track down the mother creature and kill her, neutralizing the threat. Except at the end of the episode, Data reports that a homing beacon has been sent from Earth to an unexplored distant sector of the galaxy. This was originally to tie in with the introduction of the Borg in the second season, and indeed the subsequent episode, The Neutral Zone, serves as further prelude to First Contact. In the Neutral Zone, after the Enterprise revives 3 20th century humans from cryogenic stasis, the ship is ordered to the Romulan Neutral Zone, where they find multiple Federation colonies have been completely wiped off the map. The Federation thinks that the Romulans are to blame, but towards the end of the episode, the Romulans reveal that several of their colonies have also disappeared. English. Conspiracy and the Neutral Zone are deemed by Enterprise writer and producer David A. Goodman as being the first truly watchable episodes of The Next Generation, paraphrasing a little bit. Unfortunately, the 1988 writers' strike nixed any plans to connect the neural parasites, referred to in Star Trek Online as the Bluegills, with the Borg, and in canon, their true origins remain a mystery. TNG Season 1 was rather chaotic behind the scenes. Roddenberry's tight grip on the franchise led him to personally rewrite the scripts for the first 15 episodes to align them with his uber-utopian dogmatic belief that in the 24th century, humans would have eliminated workplace interpersonal conflict. Unlike the frequent, crusty banter between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy in the original series, in TNG, conflict between human officers was to come primarily from outside sources. While this rule was relaxed later on, in Season 1, it made writing dramatic television difficult. The turnover of writers in Season 1 was nothing short of legendary, and Gerald and Fontana quit after disputes with Roddenberry. Gerald even claims that Roddenberry's attorney, Leonard Meislish, destructively interfered with the show, including removing a gay couple that Roddenberry had promised would be included. Roddenberry was personally distraught with how much trouble Meislish had apparently caused, including chasing all of Gene's friends away. But not everything was so tense. Episodes like Code of Honor notwithstanding, Jonathan Frakes has said that Season 1 was a time when the show took more risks, many of which eventually paid off, like Data's fascination with Sherlock Holmes, the introduction of lore, foreshadowing the Borg, and stories involving both the Klingons and the Romulans. While the show was once again fairly controversial when it first premiered, as fans unfavorably compared it to TOS, and it was criticized for subpar special effects and lots of episodes being resolved with the deus ex machina of Wesley saving the ship, the first season was regularly watched by over 10 million households per episode. Oh, and would you look at that? Justice was the second most viewed episode of the entire season. So, should you actually skip TNG Season 1? Well, to be honest, I do think that you can enjoy the show by doing this. Much of the meat that makes TNG memorable comes more so in the later seasons, the middle seasons in particular. That said, if you're a completionist, then binging Season 1 won't hurt you, except maybe dying a little bit from cringe. But in my opinion, a reasonably condensed viewing order would include the relevant episodes Encounter at Farpoint, Where No One Has Gone Before, Hide and Hue, The Big Goodbye, Datalore, Coming of Age, Heart of Glory, The Arsenal of Freedom, Conspiracy, and The Neutral Zone. For quality, maybe throw in 11001001, and for context about Tasha's death, Skin of Evil. Originally, this was supposed to be a single video exploring TNG Seasons 1 and 2, but God, there's no way in hell I could have done that. And Season 2 has an even more distinct vibe from Season 1, if you will, so it probably is best left for another video. My question to you is, how soon would you want me to talk about it? Because I had to watch all of Season 1 for this video. I've got to watch all of Season 2. It is a little bit shorter because of the writer's strike, but honestly, I look forward to covering it. So is that something that you would want to see me cover sooner than later? Let me know down below. With that, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads. And click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, becoming a patron or a member is a great way to do so. Links to those, as well as my social media and merch store, are in the description. That's all I have for this week. Live long and prosper.